And it is that while the lethality of their power is greater than ever, their capacity to impose control over the politically awakened masses of the world is at a historical low. Namely, in earlier times, it was easier to control 1 million people. Literally, it was easier to control 1 million people than physically to kill 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people.
The smoke in the air of our Concord bridges and Pearl Harbors is always smelled first by the farmers who come from their simple homes to find the fire and fight.
If you embark on instituting a society where government protects you from yourself, you're in big trouble, and that's what they're doing. That's all government is force. I mean, do you have a choice about paying Medicare taxes? This government uses force to mold behavior or mold the economy. They've overstepped the bounds, and they violated the whole concept of our revolution and our Constitution.
Welcome, everybody. This is the Tuesday edition of the Freedom Link here on the Orion Talk Radio Network. I'm Joe Joseph. Tonight we have a very special guest, good friend of the Freedom Link here. Alfred Adask joins the broadcast here in just a minute. Before I bring Alfred on, I want to talk real quick about the passing of Bob Chapman. If anybody didn't know or hear, Bob Chapman of the International Forecaster passed away yesterday at the age of 76 from pancreatic cancer. If you go to federaljack.com, Popeye and myself, we did a lot of research on this. We actually we have a letter from Bob's daughter, Jennifer, that goes into the circumstances surrounding Bob Chapman and his diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, but it also goes into the last months of his life. It really wasn't the best of times for him, and it's really a gut-wrenching story. So I recommend everybody go to federaljack.com and take a look at that letter that was written by his daughter Jennifer, because it tugs at the heartstrings. It really does. And my condolences to the Chapman family. Again, Alfred Adask is my guest. He's the host of the American Independence Hour. And his website is Adask, ADASK.wordpress.com. Alfred, welcome to the broadcast. Are you there, Alfred?
I'm here. I have to unmute the microphone in order to speak, doesn't it?
It is.
Otherwise, it's just as usual, just talking to myself. I'm used to that, but we have, if you want other people to hear, you have to unmute your microphone.
'Tis true. 'Tis true. Well, I'm glad to have you back. And the subject matter tonight I want to kind of talk to you about is spiritual warfare. Mm-hmm. I think that spiritual warfare, it's something that's ever present, or it's always facing us, it's always surrounding us, it's always happening, and a lot of people don't realize sometimes that they're under spiritual attack. And I heard a presentation that you gave at your local church, and I'll tell you what, I was very impressed at your grasp, because what you said it parallels what my studying and my journey has taught me about what's going on. So I guess the first thing to talk about is, how did you come to that conclusion, first of all, or come to know spiritual warfare? And the best way, I guess, to tackle that is to talk about a little bit about your man and other animals, the FDA, your battle against that. I mean, you came under some pretty heavy attack.
Yeah, we were thoroughly stressed, and that is relatively recently. I was a defendant in that case from 2006 through 2007. Technically, I'm still a defendant, but the government just dropped the prosecution. They came after 6 defendants other than myself. The case had actually begun in 2001. I was the last defendant added, and I advanced. And when I read the definition of drugs, I advanced a religious freedom defense, and And the government ultimately just dropped the case. They went away, and they were threatening us with fines of $25,000 per day per defendant. That's $9 million per year per defendant. And if this thing had gone badly, I'd have been, in theory, I could have been on the hook for like $20 million, reflecting roughly 2 years involvement in the case.
Good night.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't have that kind of money, and that was the fine that was threatened. That was the fine they could impose by law. In fact, I don't know what they would have. They wouldn't. There's no point. Might as well charge me with $10
trillion.
Exactly. Go ahead, 10 trillion. 10 quadrillion. It makes no difference once you get beyond a few thousand.
Exactly.
It's out of my range. So. But it was interesting and it was stressful. But let me just take you back a little further.
Sure.
In terms of spiritual warfare, I started publishing a magazine called The Anti-Shyster back in 1990, and I continued to do so until 2002. I published it for 12 years. And I thought I was pretty sharp. I thought I knew what was going on in the legal system. I'd been a student for 6-7 years before I started publishing the magazine. I thought I really knew what was going on. And when I started publishing the magazine, that's when my education really began. Mm-hmm. Because then people out in anywhere in the country, they'd catch wind of that magazine and they would send me articles. They'd send me comments. And that's where I really began my education. And there were a number of people that would talk to me about spiritual warfare. And at the time, that concept was just basically completely foreign to me. And as I'm sure it is to most people.
Right.
It was, but I believed what people were telling me about it because I read the character and the personality of the people talking to me. They'd send me letters. Didn't have email at the time per se, but they'd send me letters and articles and one thing and another and talk about it on the phone. I didn't get it. I didn't see it. But I knew that the people I was talking to were sincere. I knew they were honest. And I believed they were seeing things that I could not see. And over time, once you're sensitized to the concept, you begin to see, you begin to sense, and then you begin to see a little, and then you see a little more. And that's how it worked for me. And eventually, it served me well in 2006, but it was 15 years up until that point, essentially kind of preparing me to reach a level where I was able to wage a kind of spiritual warfare against the Attorney General of the state of Texas. The case involved, it started in 2001 with a husband and wife and their corporation, and on instructions from the FDA in Washington, D.C., the Attorney General of Texas and the Texas Department of State Health Services sued Mr. and Mrs. William Fresnel and their corporation for the manufacture and distribution of a controlled substance. This was the same law that it was civil suit. This isn't a criminal prosecution, but essentially this is the same law that would be used if you were manufacturing methamphetamine or, who knows, cocaine or whatever. This goes to the heart of the war on drugs. And they were alleging that Mr. and Mrs. Fresnel were manufacturing colloidal silver, which is just...
Oh, yeah, one of the hardest known substances ever. I mean, people are dropping in droves from that.
Yeah, distilled water with silver ions in it. That's all it is. It's an inexpensive antibiotic. It's effective on a couple hundred different pathogens, if I understand correctly, and they wanted it off the market, and I have little doubt the case was initiated at the behest of major pharmaceutical manufacturers. Now, I can't prove that. Maybe that's just a near unreasonable conspiracy theory, but I believe that's what they wanted off the money. It was siphoning. They wanted it off the market because the colloidal silver was siphoning money away from major pharmaceutical manufacturers of antibiotics and whatever. They came after Mr. and Mrs. Fresnel. The Fresnels spent $160,000 on attorney fees with one of the better law firms in Texas. And all they did was they spent $160,000. The financial stress drove them into bankruptcy. The bankruptcy caused them to divorce. And eventually Mr. and Mrs. Fresnel left Texas for parts unknown. Before they did, they sold some of the equipment and some of their supplies to a third party, Ben Taylor, down in Utopia, Texas. And he prepared. It looked like the lawsuit had died out at that point in time. He thought it was over. And he started manufacturing colloidal silver himself. Now, he didn't buy their business, but he did buy some of their equipment, and he bought some of their supplies.
Hold that thought, Al. Let's go to break, since these breaks are hard breaks.
Okay.
And we'll be back in 3 minutes, and we'll pick up right there. So don't go away, folks. This is a fascinating story, and the implications of it will floor you. So we'll be back in 3 minutes. You're listening to The Freedom Link on the Freedom Link at CenturyLink.net. That's the Freedom Link at CenturyLink.net. I'm joined by Alfred Adask, host of the American Independence Hour, and has a website, adask.wordpress.com. Fantastic. Go ahead and sign up to join the email list and get a bunch of fabulous articles.
Well, the articles are all free. There's no requirement to sign up for anything. You can if you want, and you'll get notice every time I publish a new article. But there's no requirement. You can stop in and visit anytime you want. We're not collecting anyone's names. There's no charge. It's there if you like it. And if you don't, that's okay too.
Good reading, though. So you're talking about the business partners, 160,000 in the hole, just pretty much flushed down the toilet.
They left the state of Texas, Mr. and Mrs. Furnell, and divorced, left Texas for parts unknown. Ben Taylor bought part of their equipment and supplies, started selling colloidal silver himself, and the Attorney General of Texas reinvigorated the case and added Ben and his corporation and his trust as 3 more defendants. Well, Ben, someone had heard me on the radio program. One of Ben's friends had heard me on the radio program that I was doing. And he said, why don't you call Alfred Adask? He might be able to help in this. And Ben called me, and he asked if I could help, and I wanted to, we talked for a while, and I said, well, I could take a shot. I don't know what's going on here. I'm not familiar with this stuff, but I could take a shot at it, and I might be able to help you in the result. Eventually, I volunteered to be fiduciary for his trust, and I did that with the idea that if I was fiduciary, then I would have standing to speak in court. Ben didn't like to speak in public. He didn't want to do it. And if I was the fiduciary, then I'd have an opportunity to speak in the courtroom and whatever. Well, much to my surprise, the Attorney General therefore added me as a defendant. All right.
Well, that's
talk about no good deed goes unpunished. I volunteered to be fiduciary. Next thing you know, I'm being threatened with fines of $25,000 a day. Well, one thing led to another, and we focused, of course, that focuses your attention. You get sued for $25,000 a day, that focuses your attention.
Sure.
And in the government's paperwork, their original complaint, they wrote at one point, and I'm reading from a copy of it right now. And in fact, this is available on my blog. I'll give you some instructions in case anyone's interested in this one before we're done. But it says, plaintiff's motion for summary judgment dated on or about May 31st, 2006, declared in part, and this is the Attorney General's motion for summary judgment. Section 4.2, definition of a drug pursuant to state and federal health care. And the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the case in this document that says the key to this case lies in determining at law and not as a matter of fact whether the defendant's colloidal products met the definition of a drug when mislabeled, falsely advertised, and sold as products intended to treat disease. Then it quotes Texas Health and Safety Code, Section 431.002, subparagraph 14, which provides in pertinent part, and here they read the definition of drugs as it exists in the Texas Health and Safety Code. And it says, drugs means articles recognized in the official United States pharmacopoeia, national formulary, or any supplement to it, articles designed or intended for the use in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animals. And I saw that phrase, man or other animals, and the first thing I thought was, why, you damn fools? You don't even know how to write.
There's a misprint.
Yeah, it has to be. They couldn't be stupid. I mean, because if you say man or animals, that means man is in one classification, animals is another.
Right.
But when you say man or other animals, it's like saying a horse or other animals. It means that they deem the first one, the man or the horse, to be a specific example of the class animals, which has horses and cows and pigs and goats and birds and whatever you want to put in the class of animals. Mm-hmm. When they write man or other animals, they are declaring man to be an animal. And I saw that, and again, I thought, why, idiots, you don't even know what you're writing here. But I kept on reading, and then the definition continues, and it says, this term does not include devices or other components, parts, accessories of food for which it went on. Excuse me, I missed a point. It says it again, intended to affect the structure or any function of the body of man or other animals. They use the phrase man or other animals twice in the Texas definition of drugs. Then they go ahead and they provide the federal definition of drugs, which is found at Title 21, United States Code, Section 321, subsection G, subparagraph 1. So it's 21 USC 321 G1, which provides in pertinent part, and it's virtually identical to the Texas definition. And again, the phrase man or other animals appears twice in the federal definition, just as it appeared twice in the Texas definition. And when I saw it the second time in the federal definition, I realized this was not a mistake. My first reaction, again, well, you don't know how to write. You don't realize what you wrote. No, they do. They know what they're doing. And in fact, before we were done with this case, we found 23 separate definitions, laws, regulations that directly applied in our particular case, that used the phrase man or other animals or animals other than man, which essentially meant the same thing.
Exactly.
And the average person seeing this would not find it remarkable. But I had already been, over the course of the previous 15 years or thereabouts, I had been brought in slowly and sensitized to the concept of spiritual warfare. And I understood, I'm a student of the Bible, and I understand that at Genesis 1:26 through 28, it says, on the sixth day, God created man in his image and gave man dominion over the animals. This is the second major premise in the Bible. It's the second major premise in the Jewish and Christian faiths. Man and man alone is made in God's image, and man is given dominion over the animals, which means man can't be an animal. As a Jew, as a Christian, you can't tell me that I'm an animal without violating my freedom of religion.
Right.
I can't be an animal. If I'm an animal, I can't be a Christian. If I'm an animal, I can't be a Jew. I don't have any of that standing unless I'm a man made in God's image and given dominion over the animals. So I understood as soon as I saw this and realized what they'd done. I realized that we could stop these people with a freedom of religion defense, where we simply said, look, we're not animals. And that was the gist of it. And it's easy to say in retrospect. At the time, it was a pretty fantastic idea. But we did advance that. We advanced that notion. And in a document in 2006, and up until the time when we advanced that line of defense, the Attorney General and the Texas Department of State Health Services had been sending us new packages of paperwork every 2 to 6 weeks, certified mail coming from the Attorney General's office. And we were getting that every 2 to 6 weeks I'd been involved in the case for at least a year at that point in time, maybe more. We sent in the man or other animals, the religious freedom defense, and they went dead silent for 5 months. We didn't hear anything from them. And when they came back, John K. Dietz, who was chief administrative judge for Travis County, he took control of the case. He retained control for 5 months. Prior to that, we'd probably had half a dozen different judges. Every time you walk in, you get a different judge. John K. Dietz took control of the case. He tried during that 5 months to negotiate a settlement. All right? He didn't want to litigate the case.
Of course not.
No, because he is a brilliant man. Dietz is a brilliant man. He absolutely, I like the man. I wish it would have been nice to have been able to be friends with the man, speak with him. I mean, the man just truly a genius.
Well, hold that thought, Al. Let's go to break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about the judge, the district attorney, and what happened. And we'll get into a little more about the spiritual warfare aspects of things when we come back, folks. So stay tuned. Again, you're listening to the Freedom Link. Welcome back, folks. Our guest tonight for hour number one is Alfred Adask at adask.wordpress.com. And the man is going 50,000 watts here soon. Fantastic.
Yep. Pretty amazing.
You said now it's the Dallas market, is that right?
Yeah, it'll be in the Dallas market.
Fantastic.
We'll still be broadcasting on shortwave. There'll be simulcasts going out over shortwave and the internet. And Melody has, I believe the program is also being broadcast on one station in Spokane, Washington, and one other one. I don't remember where it is. I just get up there and talk. I don't know where it goes.
Now what's the schedule like? Are you still doing the hour show, or is it going 2 hours, or what?
An hour. It'll be an hour once a day, 5 days a week, 3 o'clock Central Time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. We'll see how it goes, and we'll see if we can generate an audience, and that'll be the challenge.
Yeah,
because it is a brand new station. They're building it as we speak, and people won't just find, they're not just going to flip through the dial and they'll catch a station and listen.
Hey, give Alex Jones a run for his money in another big city in Texas.
No, I won't be giving Alex Jones a run for his money. His money and his ability to run is far beyond my own, but this is a big step up for me.
It's huge. Unbelievable. The best of luck to you for sure. We're talking about man and other animals, and we're specifically the judge and the attorney general in that case. Of course, they don't want this thing to go to trial.
No, they don't. And do you understand why? I think
absolutely, sure. I mean, just think of the implications and the precedent that sets if this actually gets in front of a jury of your peers. I mean, who in their right mind is going to go against you?
No, it's just about impossible. Yeah. And first off, we'll talk. Here's the political implications. We looked at this, and I understood almost instantly. As soon as I saw it the second time, I understood this is a freedom of religion defense on this. And I'd never drafted one before, but I understood that's what had to be done. Mm-hmm. I'm not only a student of the Bible, I'm also a student of the Declaration of Independence, and I understand the second sentence of the Declaration of Independence. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Everybody's heard that, but very few people appreciate the significance. That is the single most radical statement in Western political history. There is nothing to rival it in at least 2,000 years. You'd have to go back probably 3,000 years to the era of judges in the Old Testament to find a fundamental legal principle that was comparable. What people don't generally understand is that individual sovereignty, the concept of individual sovereignty, flows from God. It's not a political concept, it's a spiritual concept. And you can see evidence of this in Europe. You look into the European, it goes, you can find it all the way back into what is, I think it's 1 Samuel, the first time that the people say they want a king. Instead of living under the law form of judges where everyone was subject to the law, they wanted a king. And the king would be the only man in the country who was directly chosen by God. He was the one that had the divine right of kings, and that term was particularly true in the Holy Roman Empire, and when after England broke loose from the Holy Roman Empire and started the Anglican Church and so on. The king and the king alone received his rights from God. He had the divine right of kings. He became king in a coronation ceremony that took place in a church. He wasn't elected. He wasn't appointed. He was God's number one man within any particular nation. He was sovereign because he received his rights from God. All else were subjects because they did not receive their rights from God. They received their rights indirectly. Whatever God gave the king, if he wanted to pass some rights out to the people, he could, and he could take them back anytime he wanted. He was the one sovereign in the whole country because he was the only one who received his rights from God. When our country started up, the founders did something that was virtually unprecedented in Western history. Again, you'd have to go back to the era of Judges in the Old Testament before you came close. They said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. They are saying that all men are equally endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. In declaring all of us, every one of us, to receive these rights as an attribute of our creation, they elevated all men to the status of sovereigns.
Yeah, fantastic.
And this is of enormous import. This is the foundation for American exceptionalism. It's the foundation for everything great and extraordinary that ever came out of this country. They said we're all sovereigns, and this is borne out in the case of Chisholm versus Georgia, 1793. Supreme Court declared that the people of this country are sovereigns, plural, without subjects. That's what the intent was. The reason this is important is because the government serves the sovereign. In England, you had a king. He was the sovereign. Below him, in a pecking order, you have the government. The government serves the king. And the government, and below the government, you have all the subjects. The subjects are, call them subjects, they are subject to whatever rules, oppression, whatever else is imposed upon them by the government. The subjects are below the government. The sovereign is above the government. In England, they had one sovereign per in Europe, they had one sovereign per country. Our country started out and said, no, everybody's going to be sovereign. And what that did is it meant the government was no longer our master. It meant we were all above the government, and the government was our public servant. This is a consequence of receiving your rights from God. Third sentence of the Declaration says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The first half of that sentence, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, declares the purpose of government as envisioned by the Founding Fathers. It was to secure the God-given unalienable rights to every man, woman, and even unborn child.
Right, not just to a sovereign, but to everybody.
Everyone. Everyone was not just a single sovereign.
Not to a king, I should say, sovereign. Right. Not to a king or a queen.
Yeah, and the presumption here, incidentally, is that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. These unalienable rights coming from the Creator correspond to the divine right of kings, in my opinion. When do you suppose the rights, those unalienable rights attach, Joe?
I'm sorry, say that one more time?
When do you suppose you are endowed by your Creator with certain unalienable rights?
When? All the time.
No. The answer to the question is at the moment of your creation.
Oh, right. Absolutely, yeah. You're born with it. You're actually
No, not even born with it. 14th Amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. 14th Amendment civil rights that trace the 14th Amendment, they don't kick in until you are actually born. It's part of the reason why they allow abortion. The child doesn't have any, the fetus doesn't have civil rights because it has not yet been born.
Right.
But under the principle of the Declaration of Independence, your rights attach as an attribute of your creation, not your birth. In Jeremiah, I think it's in Jeremiah where God's talking to Jeremiah, and he says, I knew you long before you were even in your mother's womb.
Yeah, he did. He certainly did.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So our creation is no later than our conception. And it may have been eons before we were even conceived in the womb. We may have already been created. The point being that under the principle we find in the Declaration of Independence, abortion is illegal. Even the unborn child has God-given unalienable rights that attach as an attribute of their creation, not their birth. Because, and again, 14th Amendment and the civil rights that flow from it don't attach until after you've been born. It laid the foundation for why we can have abortion in this country under civil rights. But if people understood the Declaration of Independence and they understood the spiritual implications of that document, it would be one of the arguments to put an end to abortion in this country.
Right.
Well, it's also relevant insofar as those rights attach, says all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. They're talking about mankind. They're talking about both men and women. But those rights don't attach to persons. They don't attach to inhabitants or occupants or citizens or taxpayers. You've got to appear in the capacity of a man if you want to make a claim on those God-given unalienable rights.
That's right. Stand by. Last segment of the broadcast coming up, folks. Welcome back, folks. Don't forget to tune in every Wednesday and Friday from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. here on Orion Talk Radio for Down the Rabbit Hole with Popeye. And again on Sunday from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. He's got great guests, good information. It's a heck of a show, so tune in and support the other hosts here on Orion Talk Radio. Joe Joseph here, along with my guest, Alfred Adask, adask.wordpress.com. And a fascinating story here. You know, we're in our last segment. So where do we go from here, Alfred?
Where we go is the significance is that you don't have any unalienable rights as guaranteed in the Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
That you don't have any if you're an animal.
Absolutely.
More.
Right.
Third sentence of the Declaration says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. It's telling us the purpose of government is to secure the unalienable rights to all men. But if you're animals, you don't get those rights, and government is not obligated to secure your rights on your behalf. If you're an animal, you are no longer a sovereign over government. You are a subject. You're livestock. You're absolutely subject to government rule, and they can do anything they want with you. If you are an animal, you can look at Genesis 9:6, and it tells you why you can't kill a man, why murder is illegal. And it explains the reason is because man is made in God's image. Animals are not. The reason we can kill pigs and sheep and cows and everything else, the reason we can kill them and eat them is because they're not made in God's image. And if you're not made in God's image, as per Genesis 1:26 through 28, we can kill you too. In fact, when prior to the Holocaust in Germany, before the Nazis could round up the Jews and take them off to camp and kill them, they first passed laws that declared the Jews to be Untermenschen. This is an act of genocide. When they said Untermenschen, Unter means under, and Mensch or Menschen means, in German it refers to men. They were saying they were under men, they were subhuman, they were animals.
Wow.
It was a presumption, a legal presumption that's essential to committing genocide. And this isn't rhetoric, this isn't hyperbole. This is what the law is. The first thing, and you can look, the 8 stages of genocide, the third stage is dehumanization. It's where you declare the other group, whatever they are, the other religion, the other race, whatever it is. You declare them to be animals, because if they are, you can exterminate them like a hive of wasps or a nest of rats. If they are men and women, you can't kill the women, you can't kill the non-combatants, you can't kill the children, you can't kill the elderly. Not if they're men. You understand? But if they're animals, yeah, kill them all.
Sure, why not?
We found, again, 23 instances in Texas and federal law that applied in our case directly, that used the phrase man or other animals or animals other than men. And we've looked in 5 other states and found the same definitions in 5 other states. I presume it to be true in virtually all of the states. All of the states, I won't say all of them do, but I'll bet you that certainly the majority, and I suspect there might only be a couple exceptions of a state that doesn't define drugs in terms of man or other animals. We've had people contact us, heard us talk about this on the internet and on shortwave, and they've contacted me, one from England and one from Australia. They've looked at the drug laws in England and Australia. I haven't verified this for myself. They report that their laws also presume the people to be animals. I'm willing to bet you that this is a fundamental presumption for the New World Order.
Yes.
The New World Order legally presumes the people to be animals.
That's
in
right.
violation of the Christian faith, Jewish faith, and I'm not a student of the Muslim faith, but high probability that they also regard themselves as made in God's image.
Yeah, you've got to think that all the other religions out there would put some sort of value on humanity in some way, shape, or form.
Well, most of them do, but some of them don't. I mean, you can get into a pagan religion, and that's essentially one of the things we were prepared to argue, that the government, when they declared us all to be animals, they were subjecting us to a pagan religion, violation of the Establishment of Religion Clause found in the First Amendment of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
We advanced this defense, and the government ultimately just folded their tent and they left. We haven't heard from them since 2007. And the reason is that the whole war on drugs is based on the presumption. It's based on a definition of drugs that presumes the people to be animals. I believe I could walk around with a kilo of cocaine under one arm and a kilo of heroin under the other arm, and there's not much government can legally do about it because I understand the spiritual implications of their drug laws. The drug laws, I don't advocate using drugs, and I don't use them, and I don't have any heroin or cocaine, but I'm making a point here. And I know, and I'm not advocating that drugs are a good thing or that's, but legalizing drugs is better, in my opinion, than maintaining this damn drug war if the cost of the drug war is to presume the people to be animals. Where was I? Lost my train of thought. Here, political implication.
Right.
The war on drugs laid the foundation for much of the modern police state.
Yes.
I'll make you bet that half of what police officers do in the country right now is based on drug-related crimes.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, it fuels the prison industrial complex.
That's the next point. It fuels that. This is also at the bottom. This definition of drugs that presumes the people to be animals is at the bottom of the billions of dollars of profits that are being generated by big pharmaceutical companies in this country. Billions of dollars, all right? And we've got hundreds of millions of tons, or at least millions of tons, I don't know, but millions of tons of concrete and steel that have been used to build all these damn prisons in this country. We jail more people than as a percentage of population than anyone else in the world. And most of it is based on these drug laws, which are based on the presumption that you and I and everyone listening is nothing but livestock, and in absolute, it's an act of genocide. It's a violation of fundamental principles of the Jewish and Christian faith. There's no way I can't be a Christian and be an animal. We don't have churches for horses and pigs and cows and sheep and dogs.
That's right.
If you're not a man made in God's image, go away. You don't belong there.
Mm-hmm.
All of this is at risk if our defense had gone public. All right, if they took us into court and you go ahead and set a jury down, I want to see the jury that's prepared to declare themselves to be animals. Declare their children to be animals, particularly when they understand that this implicates genocide, that it strips you of your standing as a Christian, as a Jew, maybe as a Muslim. You're not going to find a jury to go along with that. And even if they could, then we appeal. We have an opportunity to make precedent. Sooner or later, in theory, we'll find an appellate court that has to admit that the people aren't animals, that the government can't. And when that happens, the drug war disappears, and the police state is badly disabled, and the prison industrial complex becomes a ghost town, and major pharmaceuticals go down. American medicine is based on the presumption that the people are animals.
Right.
The definition of drugs involves the phrase man or other animals, and so does the definition of medical devices. There is no medicine. There is no medicine in America, or virtually none, that doesn't involve either drugs or medical devices. And they both use the phrase man or other animals. So the point was, there are so many billions of dollars in power and control, and Obamacare is going to be based on this. Obamacare is designed based on the presumption that you're all a bunch of animals. There was so much at stake, they couldn't dare take it to court. And so in 2007 after 5 months of negotiation to see if we'd settle, and we wouldn't. We had 2 more hearings on jurisdiction, and then we haven't heard a thing from them now since 2007, and that's, going on 5 years.
That sounds like a resounding victory to me.
And it's based on spiritual warfare.
Right.
We defeated these, and it's interesting because the first 3 defendants, they hired one of the best law firms in Texas and spent $160,000 and got nowhere. And we went in there, pro se's, no attorneys. We read the law, and to the best of my knowledge, I'm the first one to read the law and realize what it meant.
Yeah.
And in fact, we trace this backwards, and the earliest instance we can find of man or other animals is the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act. It's the first time we know where this government declared the people to be animals. 1906, they've been doing this for a century, and no one has picked up on it until now.
Over 100 years.
Yes, sir.
Unbelievable that's happened, and unbelievable that the states and the federal government consider us to be that. But I mean, it does make sense. And when
it's part of the way they strip us of our God-given rights. It's part of the reason they want a separation of church and state. It's part of the reason they say Christians are terrorists, or at least some of them do.
Which is, I think, why people today, the men today, need to be men and not be sheep. They need to stand up and be men.
Not be persons and not be inhabitants, not allow yourself to be called taxpayers or occupants or a bunch of other things. You got to be a man made in God's image and endowed by your Creator with certain unalienable rights. And under those circumstances, if you can assert that effectively and you can understand that phrase and assert it effectively, you can hold this government at bay. Again, we've been threatened by the Attorney General of the state of Texas with fines of $9 million a year. Me. Ran them off with the freedom of religion. Point. Spiritual warfare works if you can learn how to wage it yourself.
Yeah.
This isn't just some nonsense. This isn't just some bogus, bizarre theory. This stuff works, and it can save you.
Wow. Now, Alfred, is there contact information that people can get in contact with you if they need your help or advice?
It's on the blog.
Okay, so go to...
Visit the blog at adask.wordpress.com. That's ADASK. WordPress.com.
Thank you so much for coming on the broadcast tonight, Alfred.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, no sweat. And folks,